Good evening. I hereby call this June 8th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. I'd like to recognize the city clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
Councilmember Larson.
Present.
I want to thank everybody for being here today, particularly as we always do. I'd like to start off by thanking our public safety personnel for the work that they do every single day to keep the citizens of this community safe. So we'll give a special shout out to the fire department, the emergency management department, and the police department. Thank those brave men and women for the work they do every single day. These are unprecedented times. And we need you now more than ever, and I think we have an opportunity now as a community to come together now more than we ever have. So thanks for the work that you all do in terms of public safety. We have 4 items on the general agenda. We have information requesting for trolley pubs to be considered for additional vehicles for hire in downtown Winston-Salem. There's an item considering violent crime status report in Winston-Salem. There is a resolution in support of the 8 Can't Wait National Initiative on police policy reform. And then the last item is a resolution in support of reallocating $1 million in proposed funding to police appropriations for an anti-poverty initiative. Items on the consent agenda are approved with 1 unanimous motion. Unless a member of the committee wishes it to be considered, we have 1 item on the consent agenda. Members of the committee, are there any items that should be pulled for consideration? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the consent agenda. Second.
It's been motioned and properly seconded. All in favor of the consent agenda, please vote yes. Opposers, no. That is unanimous. The consent agenda is approved. Madam Clerk, item G1, please.
Item G1, information on requests for trolley pubs to be considered for addition to vehicles for hire in downtown Winston-Salem.
Providing information on this is Mr. DeCane. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee, members of the City Council. This evening, we have Captain Kelvin McLaren of our Winston-Salem Fire Department, who is here to present some information on an opportunity to add a new business and a new vehicle type to our vehicle for hire ordinance. So with that, I'll introduce Captain McLaren, and he'll come up and give you the presentation. And then between he and I, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. DeCane.
Yes, sir.
Captain McLaren, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Damon. Good evening to the mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council, also the office of the city manager. I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration for my request for trolley pubs to be considered for addition to vehicles for hire in downtown Winston-Salem. Mind if I fix this? Sorry about that. All right, next slide, please.
Oh, and if you can give your name and address for the record,
right.
please. Thank you.
Kelvin McLaren, 1992, Craver Meadows Drive, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27127.
Thank you.
That's why I operate a fire truck and not AV equipment here, so pardon.
But you are a perfectionist, and that's good in the fire industry.
Thank you. So who we are, Hook and Ladder Party Pumper will be Triad's first party bus company, owned and operated by myself. We will provide unique opportunity to experience downtown Winston-Salem from a fire engine perspective. Also, we will offer entertainment experience like no other in Winston-Salem, whether you're enjoying, a refreshing beverage with your friends and coworkers, doing a pub crawl, tailgate, or a concert series. You can ride a fire pumper like the professionals in a fun, safe, controlled environment. Next slide, please. So the services that we will provide, that we're proposing to provide, are private tours of downtown Winston-Salem. Also bar crawls, bachelor parties, and tailgates. Of course, our tours will be in compliance with the current open beverage or BYOB guidelines that are consistent with city codes. So no glass, no visible beer cans will be prohibited during tours. In the current market that the party engines are currently functioning are Raleigh, Nashville, and Miami. Next slide, please. So when it comes to, I guess, the most important tenet of this proposal is the safety and security. All tours will be navigated by one certified first responder and one host or hostess. Depending on where we are with this pandemic, all equipment and seats will be sanitized before and after each tour. Temperature checks, which will be touchless, will be administered to patrons prior to boarding the party bus. And also disposable masks and hand sanitizer will be available upon request. So based on the CDC recommendations, we will be in compliance and abide by those guidelines in regards to COVID-19. As far as the routes and collection points, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We plan to kind of piggyback off of the routes and collection points that was approved by City Council on May 21st, 2018. I believe that was Trolley Pub, Pedal Winston-Salem. And also in addition to the routes, that was approved May 21st, 2018. We would like to add some of the growing and sprouting breweries here in Winston-Salem, Radar Brewery, Centenary Brewery, and also Fiddling Fish. Next slide. And so this is my current apparatus that I purchased. As you can see, it's the bare bones, bare minimum. It's a retired service pumper out of Virginia. Next slide. Next slide. And so this is my vision and how it will be retrofitted to accommodate our patrons. We will seat no more than 10 in the rear of the section. And also we will have a guardrail to protect, I guess, to prevent falling, well, fall protection, I should say. And all of this will be retrofitted here locally. Next slide. And as you can see, we'll have seating area for the patrons to sit as they're touring downtown Winston-Salem, and also seat belts will also be functional also in the back. All right, that should be it.
Captain McLaurin.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for bringing your innovative idea to the city. As an entrepreneur, I think it makes sense, and I just want to appreciate your passion. If I'm getting this correct, you aren't coming to the city for any money or anything of the sort. You're just asking permission to be able to be considered as a vehicle for hire on our streets. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there any other additional questions? Councilmember McIntosh.
Yeah, just from a standpoint of Governor Cooper's COVID guidelines, I'm assuming you've done the homework and know that this falls within what is acceptable practices.
Yes, and based on the current situation, I would not launch anytime soon. I would expect to launch phase 3 or beyond phase 3. Yeah. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilman Larson.
Attorney or somebody, does this require an ordinance change for us to take forward?
It does, sir. We're getting a nod from Mr. DeCane.
Oh, yes. To my knowledge, it does.
And so how quickly, if we're not meeting in July, when would we expect to see this?
My forecast, I believe, to launch in the fall of the year. So nothing pressing.
Nothing pressing.
Are there any other questions?
Councilwoman Scipio.
I think this is a nice adaptive use of surplus equipment. It's even exciting to think you could ride on a fire truck this way. My only concern is that it seems to be restricted to downtown, but I could see tours in other areas of the city and going to other venues. Yes. And I didn't know whether you were just wanting to restrict yourself to just downtown and do pub hopping. But I could see it as a wonderful kind of way to introduce people to our city, some of its history, and other ways. So I love the idea, but even a private tour or private use of this would be a great kind of thing for birthday parties or receptions or any kind of gathering. I just didn't know if you were just trying to restrict yourself to downtown.
To answer your question, Councilmember Scipio, just kind of want to get the ball rolling now with this first phase, and in the future, add more fleets, or add more vehicles to the fleet, and also expand, particularly to the eastern region of the city, particularly Martin Luther King Drive, Winston-Salem State. Hopefully I can maybe work with them to maybe provide tours of the campus in that area, you know, for incoming freshmen, parents, and things of that nature. So yes, I do plan to expand in other parts of the city.
Thank you, sir. And so this is an informational item, so it sounds to me like there's consensus to bring this forward potentially in August. We're not meeting in July. To Councilmember Scipio's point, perhaps we can entertain the idea of downtown, but staff can bring us some other information how Union Station, Winston-Salem State, or some of the surrounding points could also be included in this. It's a good idea, and you have our support, it seems, and so we'll look at it in August and try to move forward.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great idea.
Item G2, please.
Item G2, Violent Crime Status Report.
Periodically, we like to have a discussion about violent crime that occurs in the city of Winston-Salem. So giving us, maybe queuing us up on this report, I'm just going to recognize Chief Thompson. I'm sure you might have somebody else to do it, and I know you're perfectly capable of doing it on your own. So she has designated that responsibility to Chief Miles. So Chief Miles, if you would just come give your name and information for the record, and you have the floor, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm
evening.
Natasha
Good evening.
Miles. Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Adams, and distinguished members of the Council and Committee. I am Natasha Miles, Assistant Chief with the Winston-Salem Police Department.
Greetings.
You might want to move a little closer to the mic.
Pardon me, I'm trying to breathe here.
I know. Feel that.
First, I would like to say that we continue to support demonstrators for George Floyd. The actions and inaction of the Minneapolis officers has sparked fury across the nation. Those officers' actions are unacceptable. We will continue our support, and most importantly, we appreciate the members of this community for being an example to all while practicing your First Amendment rights. As we deal with the aftermath of George Floyd, we cannot overlook what is happening right here on the home front with gun violence. It remains a struggle for us as law enforcement to put into words our concerns with the rash of senseless gun violence incidents and homicides in this community. We continue as much as we possibly can to try and eradicate the problem. Violent crime continues to lead to the premature death of our young men and women in this city and cause non-fatal injuries to other members of this community. We realize these crimes do just not hurt victims. We know it affects families and also the community. We continue to solve many of these crimes, but that's not ending the violence. Over the past couple of weeks, officers with the Winston-Salem Police Department have investigated 6 homicides and 7 shooting incidents. Since January 1, 2020, we've had a total of 47 shooting incidents, excluding our homicides. Summarizing the homicides, 50-year-old Ella Lorraine Crawley was located in the 300 block of Northwest Boulevard on May 23rd around 7 a.m. by a passerby. She was located lying near a walking path in the Gateway Commons Park. Ms. Crawley had suffered several visible injuries to her head and was in grave need of medical assistance when she was discovered. She succumbed to her injuries on the following day. An autopsy would later determine she died as a result of blunt force trauma and strangulation. Items of evidence gathered as a part of this investigation have been submitted to the laboratory for analysis, and the investigation into her murder remains active. Kevin Raphael Johnson. Mr. Johnson's was located in the 200 block of Clayton Street on Monday, May 25th at 10:28 p.m. Officers located Mr. Johnson lying on the porch of a residence. He had suffered multiple lacerations from an edged weapon and pronounced deceased at the scene. A person of interest has been identified, and it is determined that this person of interest was known to Mr. Johnson. The evidence in this matter indicates that this incident resulted from an ongoing dispute. Kelvin Juan Bonner. On the morning of Wednesday, May 27th, Mr. Bonner agreed to meet an individual in the street in front of his home. At approximately 6:32 a.m., the Winston-Salem Police Department began to receive reports of a firearm being heard discharged in the area of Park Circle. Mr. Bonner was located deceased in the street, having suffered a gunshot wound. A person of interest has been identified in this investigation. Jericka McGee, and I apologize if I have mispronounced her name. On the morning of Thursday, May 28, 2020, a person driving to work discovered the body of 21-year-old Jericka McGee lying in the roadway in the 1200 block of East 20th Street. Ms. McGee had been shot to death. The investigation into Ms. McGee's murder led detectives to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Evidence was subsequently developed to charge 27-year-old LaShonda Rochelle Tolliver with the murder of Ms. McGee. Ms. Tolliver is also a resident of Winston-Salem. Detectives continue to investigate the murder of Jericka McGee, and the investigation is ongoing. Both Ms. McGee and Ms. Tolliver were known acquaintances. Phillip Tyrone Legette. On May 31st at 2:01 a.m., the police department responded to multiple 911 calls indicating that a shooting had occurred at 118 Charleston Court. Upon arrival, officers located about 30 people fleeing the area, and at that time, Mr. Legette was discovered lying unresponsive on the sidewalk. Mr. Legette had suffered a gunshot wound and was pronounced deceased at the scene. It was determined that Mr. Legette had been shot while attending an outdoor party at this location, and many of the partygoers were identified, but almost all refused to cooperate with detectives. A person of interest has been identified in this incident. Just yesterday, on June 7th, around 2:49 a.m., officers responded to a report of a shooting at 212 Meadowview Drive. Officers located a deceased male inside the residence. At this stage, the investigation we're very early into the incident, and limited information that is available. With the exception of the murder of Ms. Crawford, these incidents are not random acts of violence. We know violent crimes such as these still go unreported. For instance, as it relates to the senseless death of Jericka McGee, we know that several residents heard Ms. McGee screaming for help, as well as the gunshots that rang out simultaneously, but no one bothered to call the police. Ms. McGee's lifeless body was discovered several hours later by someone on their way to work. Not only does the violence have to stop, it's time for the people to get involved. You cannot sit idle in your home while hearing a person screaming and gunshots ringing outside your door and not do anything about it. To date, we have investigated 12 homicides in the city compared to 10 in 2019. Of the 7 prior homicides, appropriate charges have been made in these cases, with the exception of 1. The investigations into the death of Antonio Moran remains open and active. We ask anyone with information related to any of these crimes to contact the Winston-Salem Police Department at 336-773-7700 or Crime Stoppers at 336-727-2800. And as you can see on the map, those are incidents highlighted are homicide incidents, and we just want to reiterate that they're not confined to one specific area of the city, that they're spread out across the city. The Winston-Salem Police Departments continue in its efforts to combat crime, and we take gun violence seriously. We continue to educate the community on gun crime and forge relationships that identify and support our efforts to disrupt and curtail gun violence. The Violence Firearm Investigation Team continues to utilize the National Integrated Ballistic Information System, as we call NIBIN, to identify ballistic evidence in these cases, which has led to many arrests. However, that alone is not enough to stop violent behavior. We cannot continue to tackle these issues without the support of the community and the criminal justice system. In addition to our usual actions to combat gun violence, we continue to work towards the completion of the special requirements to procure a gun detection system. We are optimistic the gun detection system will assist us in identifying problem areas and combating this problem. As you are aware, we have also applied for grants to assist in our efforts to establish a real-time crime center. In our research and visits to agencies across the country, we realize the advancements in technology have developed into far more of an effective tool, and is something we believe will help us in our fight against violent crime and assist in all natures of police work. We're confident that we are moving in the right direction to find a solution to combating crime and putting an end to violence across this city. We continue to meet and collaborate with law enforcement partners and community organizations to address violent crime. The information provided varies in relevance to police response to gang activity and gun violence. We will continue to target violence and gang activity in this city. We continue to face fewer challenges more urgent than gun violence, and we are committed to working with our partners and members of the community to tackle violence in a way that people continue to feel safe. Any questions?
Assistant Chief Miles, I want to thank you for your presentation and start off by saying thank you and the Chief and the department for what you're doing to curtail violent crime in the city of Winston-Salem. We know that one homicide, I always say, is one homicide too many. And up until this point in 2020, we've experienced 12 homicides. So I call upon those members of the community to come forward and talk about ways that we can reduce violent crime in our city. And sometimes that means coming forward, doing the right thing, and telling us what's going on. Because we can't continue this way. I love the police department. I love what you guys are doing. I love this community. I want to thank, the young community advocates who are out there every single day. Your Corey McCanns and your Frankie Giss and all the young folks who are trying to put an end to this violence. But we all need to speak with one voice. We all need to strike with one fist. So we say to those who are committing the crimes, we want to stop you, or we want you to turn and do more productive things. But if you can't get it together, we're going to get you off these streets. Because I have kids, Many people in this place has kids. We want to leave this community better than when we found it. So this update does not make me happy. It does make me informed, but I want to call on the community to come forward in order to help us to solve these crimes. Councilmember McIntosh.
I want to piggyback on what Chair Taylor is saying. At a couple of protest rallies that I've participated in and spoken at, I've asked people to harness some of this energy that's upwelling right now, and let's talk about gun violence. We really need to handle that at the same time as this. And there's this big wave of political power that's come forth, but that needs to be on the agenda as much as anything else, is to solving gun violence. So thank you guys for what you all are doing.
Councilmember Scipio.
Thank you so much for this excellent report that you've given us on violent crime, which in an ideal world, we would not want to have it. But I have quite a few questions for you. Simple questions. First, are any of these, to your knowledge, gang-related homicides?
We do believe that a few are.
A few are. And how about of those 47 shootings, do they tend to be gang-related, or do you know?
Quite likely
Okay.
to be gang-related.
I know I get so many calls about gun shootings, just too many gunshots in the neighborhoods. How successful have our efforts been in detecting the gunfire? I know we had that system that we were putting in.
Well, unless someone calls or if an officer is in the area, we're not necessarily notified. For instance, as I just explained in Ms. McGee's homicide, several people heard the gunfire, heard her screaming, but failed to call the police.
Mm-hmm. I know in my neighborhood, people kept calling me. I said, you need to call the police. Every time you hear the guns shooting, call them. And so I think if we encourage residents to just call, then, because I do know when they've called in the neighborhood, you targeted it, and we took care of some of that action that needed to be taken care of. I thank you for that.
If you don't mind, let me just add that we have created some door hangers that we will be placing on doors when we're out in the neighborhoods to get people to participate and get involved in letting us know when they do hear gun violence.
Right. Has the stolen car gang been shut down with the young people?
Well, we just had an incident to take place.
Okay, thank you.
It slowed down, but
It slowed down, but it's still operating. What I heard in your report was that oftentimes these victims know each other,
Yes, ma'am.
the person. Is there a need somehow for conflict resolution in our community? Do you think people need to have those skills on how to deal with that? And does the police department do anything in that regard?
yes, we do. Our Community Resources Division has a variety of information and education and are out in the community often and participate in community events sharing that information.
Great, thank you.
And we will continue to do more of it.
So I'm going to just give you a plug. I'm sure you've heard of PURE, a group of neighborhood associations, and it might be good if you can make contact with them to start getting that information out to neighborhoods, different neighborhoods. I think that's really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Larson.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I'd like to compliment the police on, I think, being very progressive in the technology field. I mean, I think we've seen, even since I've been on council now for 3 years, we've seen a real effort with the body cameras. We brought on additional detective devices regarding shell casings. We now have an audio system that's going to help us identify shots. This is all cutting-edge technology, and I really think we can applaud in the effort the police are taking on their part. I think ultimately it comes down to neighborhoods, it comes down to people and neighbors, and paying attention to your surroundings and helping each other, and that's what this is all about. I appreciate the efforts that we've seen recently of people coming together. We have some problems in this city, but I'm sure that we will solve them. We're going to talk about a few things, I think, in the next session, of very positive things that I think the police are currently doing and will be doing in the days ahead. One thing, there are a couple things that I would like maybe offline if I could get them. I would like us to look at some trends generally, if I could. You gave us 1 year back trend of 1 year. Could we go back, say, 3 years, maybe 5 years, and look at some trends specifically of what we call violent crime, and that is assaults, homicides, shootings. Just at some point, and you can just provide this offline if you would, as to what we're seeing nationally, maybe what we're seeing locally. Just give us some idea of how we're doing. My perception is that we're kind of in the same state that most places are in right now, and that we're doing as well as we can do with the societies that we're dealing with. But if you could help me understand that a little bit, I would appreciate that.
I will, sir.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As long as I've been in this community, which is all my life, we've seen, just like any other city in this country, the crime increase. And the years that it didn't increase is because everybody had an opportunity at a better life. When we fail to have leadership that sees the value of a good education, when we see the failed leadership of realizing that people need economic development in their communities, making sure everybody has a chance to get a good job, get some training, has money to buy food even. What we're seeing now, again, with this virus, these systems that were always there, that are systemic and bad for all of us, but marginalized communities, and remember, I've been here a while, have always suffered the most. And until we could have, like we got now, you could have the best intentions, public safety. But until we go to the root cause, which is better communities, better opportunities, better education, jobs, this trend is not going to change. But hopefully with what we're seeing now, what has transpired in our country over the past 2 weeks, that people see that all the systemic issues have risen to the top. Pandora's box is open. And you gotta know that there's a root cause to the behavior, where there's not enough money for mental illness, not enough money for domestic violence, not enough money for daycare. And Mr. Chair, I know I'm on a rant, but I guess I'm like everybody else in the country. For 2 weeks now, this is, I just watch it and I go, until we want to do better for other people, this deal is not going to change. Even though I pray and I hope, until we give what you're going to talk to in a few minutes, it's not going to change. But I thank our police, fire, public safety for everything you do. But it's not enough, just them, as they said. If people would just speak up, you don't have to give us your name. We don't have to know where you live. We don't need your phone number. We don't need any of that. We just need you to give us some tips on how we can bring some closure to these families and these neighborhoods. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams, the picture that comes in my head is an iceberg. And at the tip of the iceberg, as you presented, Assistant Chief Miles, is violent crime, right? But below the surface of the water, there are so many systematic details that are the reasons for the violent crime. And item G4, we'll discuss in just a moment, seeks to address the root causes of violent crime. That's not anything we're going to solve all in one swipe. But I believe that because we've been progressive, we can chip away at it a little at a time and continue to try to move this community forward. We haven't had the problems we've seen in other communities, but we do have our own set of problems and issues to address. But I think that you, the leadership team and the chief have been extremely progressive and out front with helping us to solve these issues, and we appreciate you being here today to give this presentation. Is there any more commentary or any other thing that should be considered for item G2? Councilmember Bessie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Assistant Chief Miles and all of your team for the extraordinary work you've been doing these past 2 weeks as the justified outrage has come out in massive protests and demonstrations. It is an example, I think, to other cities of how solid de-escalation policies, well-trained officers can do the job of keeping protesters safe and helping to ensure that they're able to exercise their First Amendment rights in a positive and constructive way that will help us bring long-term change. And so thank you and all of your folks. I take the opportunity to point that out now in the context of this item, in part because one of the homicides that took place recently, in fact, on May 31st, I understand it was later learned that young Mr. Legette had already committed to help at one of the protests the very next day. And so this is an example of the other part of the problem in our community, rearing its ugly head and crossing over. That example particularly caught my attention in part because while every homicide is a tragedy, and some of the stories that we have of the victims this year have been especially heartbreaking. This young man was shot pretty much outside of what 3 years ago would have been my front door on a block where I lived. And so all of us, when we get these reports, track to see as best we can to help understand what happened, where it happened, what this tells us about patterns. And so one that happens that close to where you live literally is, catches your attention and you want to know more. It's, as we know, as the police leaders tell us time after time, they're trying to you're trying to help manage the symptoms of problems that go a lot deeper. And good community-oriented policing is always going to remain an essential part of the equation, but we have to deal with more. As my colleague, Councilmember McIntosh, points out, we have to deal with the epidemic of gun violence more broadly on the streets, and part of that is going to be dealing with underlying conditions, and part of it's frankly going to be managing the problems there in a different angle with stronger common sense gun safety laws, and part of the approach is going to have to be, as I know that Councilmember Taylor is going to put forward, ideas on how we can address some of the specific problems that are creating the conditions that make people vulnerable to crime and seem to hold out in some cases to some young men in particular the prospect that joining or participating in gang activities is more attractive than the alternatives they see. So we have to assertively address all of these angles, and thank you for everything that y'all doing now to try to help do that.
Thank you, Councilman Bessie. Chief Miles, have you completed your presentation?
Just before I take a seat, I would just like to publicly extend our condolences to the families of the victims.
Amen. Item G3, please.
Item G3, resolution in support of the 8 Can't Wait National Initiative to support police policy reform.
And while we're waiting for the chief to come up, 8 Can't Wait is a national police policy reform initiative that is sweeping the country. And municipalities and cities and states are considering these policies and using it as a measuring tool to figure out how they need to adjust their individual police departments. So, Chief, I'm gonna start off. Sometimes you have to appear before us and you have to take some lumps. That comes with the job. But I want to start with something good today. I've seen you out with the protesters. You stood with them, you stood for them, and you've also stood with and for this police department. And I want to thank you for having the courage to stand in front of people. I know sometimes that's hard. I've been in a room full of angry people before, but that's what we sign up to do. And there are some people who cower behind their desks and behind their positions, but you didn't do that. You stood tall, you represented this city and this department and this community very, very well. So I want to thank you for your leadership, and I think that's the word for the day, leadership. You've got the floor.
Thank you, sir. I do appreciate it. Councilmember Taylor, Chairman Taylor, forgive me, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of this committee. I am Police Chief Katrina Thompson, and this item will discuss the 8 Can't Wait initiative, national initiative that has kind of spun up and really gained attention since the unnecessary death of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have 2 subject matter experts with our agency that will go into details as it relates to 8 Can't Wait. But before we get to that point, what I wanted to mention to you all and to our listening audience is that not only does the Winston-Salem Police Department support the 8 Can't Wait initiative, we are and have been for years in compliance with all 8 of the policies in one shape or another. And by that, I mean that in our policies, it is written, everything that is outlined or asked in those documents or in those initiatives are mentioned in some way, shape, or form in our policies. It may not be the exact language, but when you look at the definition of both, it is clear that that's what we've been doing. And they will get more into that. Since 1989, the Winston-Salem Police Department, under the vision of then Police Chief George Sweat, became a community-oriented policing agency. What that means for us is that we changed the paradigm in how we deliver law enforcement services. We understand and believe that it is absolutely necessary and that we are obligated as a law enforcement agency serving this community to build relationships during non-enforcement, non-contentious times, to develop social capital, to get partnership from our community to help us prevent and at the very least solve crime. And so when we talk about community policing, we're not talking about a squad or a group of people or 1 or 2 people in our agency. What we're talking about is the philosophy of the entire agency, top to bottom, left to right, sworn and non-sworn. So we're talking about from the time a call coming to our communication center to the time an officer goes to court to testify to that particular case, and everything in between. We believe that it is our duty and our responsibility to treat the citizens, the residents, the visitors, the business owners in our community as if they were our own family members, because in essence, they are. Our officers know without a doubt that that is the expectation that they are held to, and that is the expectation and the service delivery that our residents here in Winston-Salem deserve. That being the case, you all are very well aware of the initiatives that we've had beginning in 1989 and how they've evolved to 2020. And I am proud to say that while a lot of those initiatives started from the top down, we are now at a point where our agency and our employees get it. So they are bringing these initiatives to us bottom up. With the support of our officers understanding the vision and knowing the responsibility and obligation that they have to our community, we continue to find ways to evolve and to be creative and innovative in delivering the best law enforcement services that we possibly can to our community. That will never stop as long as I'm in this position. And I will tell you, the way our officers are trained to think, as long as these officers are in the position here in this agency, that will continue. That being the case, I'll tell you that since 1997, the Winston-Salem Police Department has been internationally accredited through CALEA, which is Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. And what that means that since 1997, without any break in accrediting credentials, we have had been accredited and recognized as an agency that follows industry standards and best practices on an international level as it pertains to law enforcement. We are very proud of that. That is something we did on a voluntary basis. And as you all review our budget, you know that it is not cheap. It is extremely expensive, but we believe that it is an investment into not just our community, but also into our officers and the professionalism that we expect in our organization. Since I became police chief, I am working with our outstanding members and staff of our planning and accreditation team. We sat down and had a conversation, and it was our staff that said, Chief, let's go for the triarch. The triarch means that not only will we be accredited through off the law enforcement side, the policing side, but also our training academy and our communication center. As most of you know, that back in March, we had the on-site accreditation come in, the assessment. They came in, went through our policies inside out. They had started doing that before they got here, but after they got here, they went through our policies inside out. They rode with our officers. They had conversations with staff. They went through and had interviews with individuals at random, and then they had public hearings with the public on our services delivery to our community. As a result, I have been notified that we have successfully passed the accreditation for the triarch, and in July, all things continue well, we will receive or be awarded our triarch, which means that the Winston-Salem Police Department will be the first law enforcement agency in the state of North Carolina to receive that level of accreditation, and the 23rd agency internationally to receive that level of accreditation. We are extremely proud of that. In addition to accreditation, members of the Executive Command Staff team are also members of PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police. Those are all major think tanks for law enforcement industries and organizations across the globe. Those organizations provide law enforcement leaders from, including practitioners from across the globe that gets together and talk about things of interest and things that evolve, creative and innovative things to do policing better, and look at ways to identify best practices in policies and best practices in procedures. In doing so, we're able to get information and be a part of developing policies that is rolled out as industry standards. Again, I'm extremely proud of that, and we continue to do that in an effort to do all we can to stay on top of the best practices that we can and be the best that we can for our community. That being the case, I am going to bring forth two of our subject matter experts to get specifically and talk specifically to you about our 8 Can't Wait initiative and where we stand as an agency. The first will be Captain Katie Allen, and Captain Allen has been with our agency right at 20 years now, I do believe. With that, Captain Allen has spent a large portion of her law enforcement career in the training division. She is currently assigned to support services, but she's going to talk to you about the training side of 8 Can't Wait, our 8 Can't Wait compliance. Also with us will be newly promoted Captain Jose Gomez. Captain Gomez has been assigned to our Professional Standards Division, and he will address the professional standards portion of the 8 Can't Wait initiative as it pertains to our agency. Captains?
And while the captains are taking the floor, I want to say, Ms. Martin, if there's anyone who is signed to speak about these items after we hear from law enforcement, we'll bring them in to sort of get their take on 8 Can't Wait or what they need to talk about. And I just want to make it clear, this isn't just about George Floyd. This is more of the straw that sort of broke the camel's back. And I've had negative and positive experiences with law enforcement, and I think some people have. We just want to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anybody else going forward. We have no problems with law enforcement, but it's good periodically that we review our policies and see how we measure up nationally, state, and locally. So thank you, Captain Allen and Captain Gomez, for being here. You have the floor.
Okay, I'm going to begin. I'm going to just kind of qualify myself and let you guys know my background so you understand where I'm coming from the training aspect. This is kind of neat. We're both here 20 years. We were in the same rookie class, so it's kind of neat to be standing here with Captain Gomez. I've been at the department, like Chief Thompson said, since 2000. I became a general instructor in 2003. That's an 80-hour class that the state requires you to go to. In 2004, I became what is called a subject control arrest techniques instructor. I'm going to refer to that as a use of force instructor just to clarify, but I became a use of force instructor, and that is also an 80-hour block of instruction. I also became a physical fitness instructor. I was the department's lead use of force instructor from 2006 to about 2010. I implemented the TASER program during that time and created that policy. And then I continue to serve as a use of force instructor, teaching our recruits and our in-service instructors as well. I also serve as a member of the use of force committee, which I'll talk about here in just a little bit, but I'm on that committee as well here at the department. I'll let Captain Gomez.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. So it's kind of a tough act to follow there with all her credentials, but just going to give you some of my experience. I've been a member of our SWAT team for 10 plus years, became a team leader as a member of our SWAT. I've served in our street crimes unit, which are addressing quality of life crimes, so very active unit. I've served in our vice and narcotics unit, and more specifically in our professional standards division, investigating any policy violations as an investigator. Since being promoted to the rank of captain, the chief has put me back into the professional standards division as the commander, so I'm familiar with policies and procedures and the investigation of any kind of allegation of wrongdoing or a violation of our policies, and familiar with that. So with that being said, we'll begin our presentation.
And one thing I forgot to mention, I'm also here, I served as the sergeant of the recruiting division and lieutenant of the recruiting division. I understand there may be some sort of questions about our hiring, so I'll be able to answer those as well. I don't know if you guys want to ask questions or if you just want to go through the questions we received, and then you guys can.
Well, I think the general consensus of the committee was to hear which particular of the 8 that we were in compliance with, maybe hear them all, then hear the ones we are in compliance with, and how we might be able to adjust for the rest.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to start. We've got the list here of the 8 Can't Wait, and the first thing that I see on our list is to ban chokeholds and strangleholds. And so specifically, I want to kind of reiterate how that is presented. We do not authorize strangleholds or chokeholds. We do not teach them in any way, shape, or form in our police academy or at our annual in-service training. So our annual in-service training is a requirement by our department. It is not required by the state, but it is something that we do every single year for our officers. But we do not teach this. The only time an officer would be able to use a strangle or chokehold is if they were at a lethal level of force. So if somebody was trying to kill them or somebody was trying to kill a citizen, they would be authorized to use that, but we do not teach it, and they have other tools that we do teach that we would probably prefer they use. But we understand that at that level of force, if there's somebody on top of me choking me and I don't have access to my firearm, I don't have access to another tool, I have to do what I have to do. It may be that I have to pick up a brick off the ground and strike a subject. It may be that I have to grab a pen from my uniform and, poke them in the neck. We just kind of at that level of force, you have to survive. And so again, I've taught use of force now for 16 years. I have no idea how to do a chokehold. We do not teach the technique that was used in Minneapolis. That's not something, and actually we go completely opposite and show how to properly handcuff where you don't even place your leg in that position.
So the requirement to de-escalate a situation, at the department, we actually provide annual training with de-escalation, and we have a list of those blocks. We've been providing this training since about 2012, and every officer has been receiving this since 2017. So some of those blocks are individuals with mental illness and developmental disabilities training, reality-based training, crisis intervention training, implicit bias training, improving decision-making skills training, de-escalation for persons in crisis training, equality in policing citizens training, juvenile minority sensitivity training, best practices for community dissent training. So that's just a portion of the training that we go through. It is encouraged that we de-escalate situations. We would rather talk our way and de-escalate a situation than have to use force, but the officers are prepared and trained to take action if they have to, but we would prefer a de-escalation method. And as you can see, we have a very comprehensive training outline that we provide to the officers, and they are provided this training on a yearly basis.
And many of those training programs require testing, both written testing and practical scenario-based testing that officers must pass to complete those courses. I'll move on to the next one, require a warning before.
This will be the third item, right?
Yes.
Prior warning.
Requiring a warning before shooting. Let me move on to this here. We specifically have a general order, 1.27, which is our use of force general order, and it specifically states, when practical, officers should issue a verbal warning prior to the use of deadly force. And then further on that, officers may find themselves in a situation where verbal warning cannot be issued. However, officers are trained to issue verbal commands when using any type of force, both lethal and non-lethal. And in fact, in our police academy, if they are taught any sort of technique, if they do not use a verbal command, they fail the technique. So they don't even pass as having doing it correctly. So this is taught throughout rookie school all the way as you transition to years of experience.
The other thing that I will add to is, and I'm sorry, that was the next question, the next one. So we'll move on to the fourth topic, which is the requirement to exhaust all alternatives before shooting. So we do not require our officers to exhaust all possible means of use of force prior to shooting, okay? And basically what that does, it helps us to prevent from keeping a citizen or an officer from a prolonged situation that they could find themselves in danger, which could cause more harm than the officer alleviating the situation immediately. So I'll give you an example. So the use of force presents itself that it's a lethal use of force. At that point, the officer would be within his rights to use a firearm and fire to stop the lethal threat. If we exhaust every single option going through the use of force continuum, that provides time for either the citizen or an officer to get hurt by the actions that are being taken by a potential suspect. So the officer has to analyze the situation, and it's a fluid situation, and they have to make a decision and make that decision based on their training and experience to effectively stop the threat as soon as possible. So that's why we allow that leeway for the officers to take that decision based on their training and experience and within our policies. and we don't restrict it for every single incident for the officer to go through every single step of the use of force continuum. Having said that, our officers routinely take lower levels of use of force that are allowed, and we see that time and time again, and they are successfully able to diffuse situations using lower levels of force.
And that kind of hits on the question or the 8 can't wait point of requiring a use of force continuum, that we do have a use of force continuum. That is constantly changing, so we continually review that and look at that. As a matter of fact, we changed it just a few years ago when the state had a case in Pinehurst where tasers and OC spray got moved up to a higher level of force, and we immediately that day changed our use of force continuum. We went to all the lineups and conducted training, so we are constantly staying on top of cases and things that would change the use of force continuum. With also the talk of escalating it, we also teach de-escalating it. So if I go to a house and I pull up and a subject pulls a gun out at me and I tell them to put the gun down and they do, and they drop to their knees and put their hands up, we teach them how to de-escalate and move down. Now you're not at a deadly level of force anymore because he's not pointing a gun at you, he's dropped the weapon, and so you can take other action. So we do teach both escalation of force and de-escalation, but we teach it as a guide and not a specific path. So you do not move, and you also don't get to move up to a level of force because a level doesn't seem to be working. So you have to stay at the level based on the action and the behavior of the person that you're trying to control. Just because it doesn't work doesn't mean you get to try something that's at a higher level.
And we do reassess those situations. So just because I'm at a assaultive level right now doesn't mean that I stop being assaultive and my action as an officer changes to something else. So we do reassess and reevaluate our use of force options dependent on the behavior that's been exhibited by any potential suspects. So that moves us over to the duty to intervene.
This is item 6, right?
So this will be 5, 6, yes, sir. So item number 6, duty to intervene. So within our rules of conduct, specifically, there's a sentence that addresses the duty to intervene for officers in any situation. So I'll read it, I'll quote it to you, that way you guys can hear it directly from our rules of conduct. So failure to take appropriate action on an occasion of a crime, disorder, or other condition deserving of police attention is a violation of one of our rules of conduct. So that specifically addresses or takes into account telling the officer you have a duty to intervene when there's a crime, disorder, or a condition deserving police action. Having said that, those rules apply regardless to whether the suspect potentially is a suspect, a citizen, or whether it's a uniformed officer, and our expectations are the same of those officers to take action if the officer is presenting actions that are not compliant with our policy or in violation of North Carolina general statute. And then I guess within that duty to intervene, we also have a special rule of conduct titled use of force. And that one states employees shall not use more force in any situation that is reasonably necessary under the circumstances. Employees shall use force in accordance with law and departmental procedures. So that specifically even narrows it down more so that the officers understand they get this training while they're in the police academy. They get this training on a yearly basis, and they know what the expectations are and what our duties and requirements are of them so that they can report any violation of these policies.
All right, the next one would be ban shooting at moving vehicles. Again, we have our use of force policy 1.27. It specifically states an officer shall not discharge a firearm from a moving vehicle unless the officer reasonably believes no other means are practical to defend himself or other citizens from the use or imminent use of deadly force. Additionally, our firearms instructors teach our police recruits and our officers that firing from or at a moving vehicle is the last resort. You have to be a sharpshooter to think that you can make that shot. You have to take and make a split-second decision, which you would consider whether you can, the likelihood of making the shot, what the consequences are of making the shot. Will the vehicle crash? Will something like that happen? What are the surroundings around the vehicle? You have to time it, just right. It's not the movies. It doesn't work like that in real life. And so we really discourage it and teach it as an absolute last resort. Many times with moving vehicles, we can get a tag number. We know who's in the vehicle. And so these are steps we can take to identify and arrest the offender later. But it's a very, very last resort, and it's discouraged by our firearms instructors.
And this is the 8th item that's coming up now, right?
Yes, sir. This is the last item in the in this topic of the 8 can't wait.
So this relates to, are we required or requiring comprehensive reporting? That is also specifically listed in our use of force policy. Any use of force incident regarding any of our less lethal weapons, you are required to make a report. Any sort of use of force that is beyond that of just putting the handcuffs on a person. So just a soft hand, unassisted application of handcuffs would not require a report, but you're arresting somebody, so you're probably writing a report anyway. But that would not require a use of force report. But anything where you're using any sort of force on somebody does require a written report. We have a specific report, a less lethal weapon supplement that is specifically created for our less lethal weapons. You are required to use this report even if you threaten the use. So even if I threaten the use of my taser and don't even get it out of the holster, I am required to write a report. Again, that's very good tracking for us to say, maybe we've threatened the use of it 20 times and we've only had to use it 5 because the threatened use caused the person to stop the behavior. So that's a great tool and that's a great thing for us to know.
Additionally, on top of that, the requirement is also for our officers. It's specifically detailed in policy that they will notify a supervisor of their use of force. That's important because our supervisor then has responsibilities to do an on-scene investigation. They respond to the scene where the use of force was applied. They conduct an investigation, an administrative investigation into the actions of the officer, the actions that the suspect took, and we come to a conclusion whether or not policy was followed. That review doesn't stop with the immediate supervisor. It goes up all the way through the chain of command, all the way through the assistant chief, eventually ending up in the professional standards division, where we conduct a review of those uses of force as well to ensure that we're compliant with policies and procedures, and if we're not, that we address those issues as they arise so that they're not festering problems.
And this would include reviewing the body camera footage that all officers are required to have on during incidents. So those are reviewed. These use of force reports are also sent to the use of force coordinator, and that person, whoever's in that position, reviews them. And we also have a use of force committee, which is made up, and I serve on that committee right now. It's made up of a diverse group of veteran, seasoned use of force officers, and sometimes we're called to look at trends, what's going on in use of force. Sometimes we're called to review, maybe there's a training issue, maybe there's somebody who needs, you use this technique, but this might have been a better technique. And so we evaluate those and provide feedback at the request of any member of the command staff or the professional standards division commander.
So that concludes all the 8 can't wait. I will tell you that there is another level of, oversight for our department, which we're kind of, special in this regard. As you guys are all aware, we do provide, or the city provides some oversight with the Citizen Police Review Board, which is an additional group that most agencies don't have. So we're proud that we're a part of that as well.
And I'm happy to say that I know that complaints for officers can be done now in person and online, and also accommodations can be done in person and online. So we are unique and progressive, but I think it's good that we pause from time to time and review our policies. So with all due respect, Captain Allen and Gomez, if you just pause for a moment, because I know that there are hundreds or thousands of people who have taken to the streets nationally and even locally with concerns about policy So I wanted to just at least open the floor to anybody who came to speak, to maybe give them 2 or 3 minutes to have their voice. If there is a policy that they suggest that we take a look at, we can compare it against what we've heard. That way we want to make sure that everybody's heard, and our job is to speak for the people. If they hear they have something to say, we want to hear them out. Is that fair to you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Okay.
sir.
If you'll give us just one moment. Is there anyone that's here to speak, Ms. Martin? G4, okay. So there's no one specifically here to speak on this item, so are there any questions? So, Councilman Bessie.
I've got several, so I can
Then I'll come to
wait.
the committee members.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Councilman McIntosh.
Just a general comment. It's really good for us to be able to have these things in writing in front of us. So many times, so much of the conversation that I've been hearing about concerns at the national level, I think, wait a second, don't we already do that? So it's really good to see this, and I think the fact that we've had these policies in place, not just since last week or last month, but for a long period of time, shows in the reaction from the community towards what's going on. So I thank you and the force and the people before you and everybody who has worked on these to get us to the point where we are now. So thank you.
Councilman Larson.
One sort of trivial question, I suppose, is, and I've been asked this on emails to me, when we talk about warnings, this police department does not give a warning shot. Is that correct?
No, it's actually written in policy that we do not allow those.
I suspect so, but
Certainly
as a
hope
matter
not.
of record, I would like that to be known to people. Second thing I'd like to comment on a little bit is the training program that the police department undergoes. I understand is the most rigorous in the whole state of North Carolina. That is, we require more class time, more field time, more training time than any other department in the state. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We actually offer almost double the amount that the state requires and specifically in use of force. So we provide a huge number of training hours, and we are known throughout the state for our training at this agency.
We've covered a lot this evening. You've covered a lot of topics this evening. But my takeaway from this is that the Winston-Salem Police Department feels that they are in full compliance with the 8 can't wait recommendations that have been put forward nationally.
Yes, sir, that is the case. We feel that we are in compliance with them and have been for some time.
And Councilman Besson, I'm coming to you, but captains, at some point in time, we do periodically get review of the Police Citizen Review Committee, their appointment status, the amount of appointments, who's on the committee. So it'd be good maybe at the next Public Safety Committee meeting in August to bring that up for consideration and just for general discussion. Councilman Bessie.
Thank you, and I'd like to add my thanks to Captains Allen and Gomez for your briefing. It's been extremely helpful. I was planning to ask for this kind of specific review item by item, and this really jumps on it. There were 2 or 3 of the 8 policies that, it seems that our policy is a check with an asterisk. And if I can ask you to go into that just a bit more, the requirement to warn before shooting. The explicit caveat was if practicable, and Captain Allen specifically mentioned that in your training exercises, if you fail to do that, you fail the exercise. Can you talk a little bit more about how you define the if practicable exception sufficiently narrowly that it doesn't take over the requirement?
So I can kind of give you an example. Say an officer responds to a store and there's a hostage being held, and it would be impractical for us to warn, and he's given us several indications that he is going to take that hostage's life. It would be impractical to give that subject a warning when he's already presented that lethal force, basically letting him know that we're getting ready to take a shot, if you will.
Another example would be a more recent example with Sergeant Sloan. You're incapacitated somehow in the line of duty, or you're being injured, I'm being choked, or something happens and I cannot physically get a verbal command out. That may be a reason. I can tell you it becomes second nature to officers that you just say it. And so I think I don't know that I've watched a use of force video at our agency where I haven't heard some type of command.
Yeah.
It becomes really second nature. It keeps you breathing in the incident.
I just wanted to be clear to folks listening that you make it clear that the if practicable is to be applied narrowly, and that the expectation in 99% of the cases is the warning. We've seen, not here, but we've seen from other jurisdictions pretty graphic examples of where that policy is not followed, and the kind of tragic results from that. The duty to intervene. It sounded from the discussion as if the duty to intervene is explicit, but the expectation that this applies to officer misconduct is implicit. Have you considered the value of adding a clause under today's circumstances, just so that everyone who's reading it understands, and that is an explicit expectation that if you do witness severe officer misconduct that's putting a citizen at uncalled for jeopardy.
I think that's exactly why we're here, to hear your input, and it's definitely something that we can talk about as members of the command staff and the executive staff, and so we definitely appreciate and seek this input from people who want to help us be better.
And, I say this without any impression that our officers fail to do that in any case that they should happen to see it. I do not recall hearing reports locally of that, but it's a current topic. So,
Sir, I will tell you that so the duty to intervene is there, and they actually face repercussions for not taking the action that's expected of an officer. Right. They too are held accountable for not taking intervention when those steps were called for.
And I believe that was mentioned in an earlier letter that Chief Thompson had circulated in commenting on those. One other, the exhaust alternatives before shooting, you went through, I thought, a very persuasive summary of why you don't put it that way. But that seemed to be the one of the 8 that has the biggest asterisk behind it, and again, I think that this is arguably one of the best trained, best led police forces in America. But in order to continue to serve as an example of how to do it right, and because we haven't always done it right every time in the history of Winston-Salem. It's been a learning process. So you might do a written summary of why you don't put it in that kind of ironclad categorical instruction, require exhaust alternatives for shooting.
And our policy, it states that the continuum is a guide, and then this is where we encourage people to participate in the Citizens Police Academy and things like that, so they can get a full understanding of the continuum and how it works, so they understand that if I go to a house and somebody starts shooting at me, I don't have to try to do a stunning technique and then OC spray, and I can immediately draw my weapon if that's where we fall. And so that's where you have to get a full comprehensive understanding of the use of force continuum.
And that's where I think the examples would be useful in explaining how it's that concept is applied here, that you wouldn't under emergency circumstances require, okay, you try the OC spray and then you try the taser, and then because you might be in a situation where that it's clear that those other tools are not going to work.
Yes, sir, and I believe that we cover that specifically through our training and through our BLET outlines, our basic law enforcement training for people that are newly minted police officers. So we cover all those scenarios, and we cover the fluidity, so the understanding is there. So when policy's read, they have a thorough understanding of what the expectation is.
And the reason I'm asking for sort of the summaries in the type of form that I'm suggesting is that most of us are not trained officers. Most of us have never gone through those trainings and those exercises. So it's helpful for us to be able to understand in a succinct way how that's interpreted and applied locally. So, thank you. It's sort of layperson's language for me.
Understood.
Thank you, Councilman Bessie. And members of the committee and council, just keep in mind, we've got one more item, and there are citizens who have signed up to speak, so we want to be respectful of their time. So if there's a need to sort of pause the conversation, do the next item, and then come back, I'm prepared to do that. But Councilmember Scipio, you've waited patiently. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, captains. You've done an excellent job in giving us information. Police work is difficult work because it requires split-second decision-making, and it's easy for people to critique it after the fact. What you kept saying was the use of force continuum. Is there a way you can explain that? Like, what's the least to the highest amount that the community might be able to understand without going into a lot of details? Could you just give us a sense of what that continuum would be like?
Yes, ma'am. So the continuum always starts with presence, presence of the officer and presence of an individual, a citizen. And then it moves two directions. It moves based on the behavior of the individual, and the behavior of the officer kind of counters that. So it's like a system of weights and balances. I can't be higher than you. And I can be lower than you, but I don't want to be. I want to be equal. And so we move from presence into what's called non-compliance. So I ask you to sit down in a chair, and you don't sit down in a chair. And so that's where we start moving from that point. And then we move up to actual levels of force. And so we look at resistive behavior for a citizen, a subject, or somebody we're trying to arrest. So the first level of force for them would be resistive, meaning they're pulling away from me, they're running, they're laying on their hands, they're just resisting my attempts at controlling them. I can counteract that with physical level of force, which would be hard hand techniques, so stuns to major muscle masses. So nothing that's going to cause great injury. So we're looking at stuns to the legs and the arms. Nothing with less lethal tools at all at this point. This is all hands-on. We also have pressure points available to us. From there, we move into an assaultive behavior. So assaultive would be on the part of the suspect. They're assaulting me, or there's an imminent threat of assault to me or somebody else. And we can counteract that with an incapacitating level of force. And this is where our less lethal tools are, such as the taser, OC spray, and then hard hand techniques, punches and things like that fall in that level of force. We discourage the use of punches because the rate of injury is high for both you and for the citizen. So we encourage people to use their less lethal tools because, again, it creates that space and opens you up to creating the situation where you could put handcuffs on them. And then we move into deadly force. So they commit some sort of act that is deadly or imminent, an imminent threat of death, and then we move into deadly force. And at that point, that's when we can use our firearms and techniques like that. If that kind of makes sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, members of the council, we've heard in detail each of the 8 can't wait, and I would suggest that if there is something that we need to discuss in any one line of policy, we can bring that item back to the committee for further discussion. But at this time, it appears that we are in compliance. There is an action item on the table to approve this resolution on supporting police policy reform. So with that being said, I'm happy to make the motion to approve this resolution. Is there a second? So it's been motioned and properly seconded for discussion. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard on this proposed resolution?
There is no public comment for this one.
No public comment. Nobody has signed up to speak for this item, but the next item there are people. So is there any discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor of approving the resolution, please vote yes. Opposers, please vote no. The resolution is approved. From public safety, it will then move to the full council for consideration at the next city council meeting. I believe that is June the 15th. June the 15th. Chief, do you need to be recognized? Thank you, captains.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
Very good.
I just wanted to quickly say 2 things. Number one, I wanted to let Councilmember Bessie and all of you know that we brought this forth as requested, but we are very open to making those changes that you are recommending to make it as clear as possible to everybody looking. We want people to know that we're about working with everyone to make us better and a better community, so we will be doing that. Also, I just wanted to mention that we appreciate your support during this time of the work that we're doing. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this time to thank the women and men of the Winston-Salem Police Department, specifically the Patrol Division, the Special Operations Division, who have worked tirelessly, the Community Resource Unit and our Street Crimes Unit, and all members that have been involved in helping us move forward and allowing our community to be heard and our pain to be felt as we go through this challenging time and this pivotal moment in our world's history. And so again, I want to thank the members specifically of Patrol Division and all other parts of the police department. And I say thanks to you. And finally, the item right before, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned for our listening audience that while Chief Miles talked about the unsolved homicides for this year, I want to make sure that our listening audience understands that our department is solid in our resolve to always work towards solving our unsolved homicides, period, regardless of what year that they occur in. So I just wanted to make that for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Larson, final comment.
Would you do me a favor, and would you tell the public, or remind the public about the academy that you run to allow citizens to become directly involved in understanding how the police department operates?
Yes, sir. That's our Citizens Police Academy, and we also have a Youth Citizens Police Academy. That's for our teenagers. So our Citizens Police Academy is a 13-week program that we house right over at our Beatty Training Center. We offer that once, sometimes twice a year for 13 weeks. It's 1 night a week, 3 hours a night for 13 weeks. And that's where our citizens, our residents, our visitors that are enrolled in the class are exposed to all aspects of policing that our full-service law enforcement agency offers. That includes being exposed to our policies, and then we also ask for their input on what we can do or what they think we can do to be better. To that point, we also have a Citizens Ride-Along program where our citizens have the opportunity, and our residents and visitors have the opportunity to have firsthand look at how our officers are reacting or responding or handling real-life calls as they are going on. So both of those have been put on pause due to COVID-19, but with and I know you all have been getting a ton of emails, just as I have, regarding what we're doing and what our policies look like. Our Citizens Police Academy provides all the information they would ever want to know about what we're doing in law enforcement here in Winston-Salem.
Do you anticipate when that class might form at this point?
We're just waiting on the executive order to be lifted, and then or the executive order that allow us to have more people gathering.
Are you accepting applications now?
We are not accepting applications right now. We did have applications that were accepted. We were supposed to have a class in April, so we have a team of people, but certainly we can look at moving forward as we move forward, getting this class that we have set aside, going forward, and then going ahead and starting another class.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Councilman McIntosh.
Yeah, this one, I hope is not going to go too long. I was going to wait till G4, but I think it's more pertinent here for Chief. We've been getting inundated with emails calling for the defunding of the police department, basically for doing it. Can you give us just a quick scenario of just the apocalypse that would create?
So defunding the police department, and I think as you look at what's going on across the country, if you talk about in Los Angeles, they're talking about taking $150 million from the police department's $1.8 billion, I think, budget. That's one thing. In Minneapolis, they're talking about totally dismantling the police department and removing all of their funds. To me, that's disastrous, and I have no idea how they would go about doing that. You heard Assistant Chief Miles talk about the homicides that we have, and I'll tell you that in addition to homicides, we're still investigating assaults on our children here. We're investigating baby deaths. We're investigating assaults to seniors. I can't imagine a community without a law enforcement agency to effectively have the funding and the resources to be able to provide the level of service that we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about for our agency. And so, again, I think that right now, emotions are extremely high. I think it's dangerous for us all as humans, but I totally understand to make those type of serious decisions on emotions. But I do understand why that is coming forth. I'll tell you that there's a reason why law enforcement exists. And if you don't fund them, there will be consequences. You heard, again, our captains talk about the training that Winston-Salem Police Department gives is double what the state requires. And I'll tell you, there are many agencies across our state that does exactly what the state requires and no more. And they would love to have our well-trained officers and are willing to pay them a little more money than what we offer just to get them. And I understand why. So all of those things play into it. And then when you talk about police officers and knowing the sacrifices that they make to do the job, we have to be conscious of the message that we send to them when we're talking about nationwide defunding law enforcement.
Thank you very much.
I'll just say thank you, Chief. We'll move to item G4, please.
Item G4, resolution in support of reallocating $1 million of proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 police appropriations for an anti-poverty initiative.
Well, I'll just be clear to Councilmember McIntosh's comment, and I didn't think he insinuated this, but in no way are we trying to have anything considered about dismantling the police department. We just want to make sure that everybody is treated equally and fairly under the law, and that money goes to where it can be used to address the root causes of crime. Currently, there are 40 vacant police officer positions. There's a proposal on the floor for consideration that would take about 15 of those positions, reallocate the money for those, which would be probably around $1 million, and use it to address, again, the root causes of crime. So if the council and the committee doesn't mind, I just want to briefly go through and touch them. So as you can see, there is a proposal on how the $1 million breakdown would occur. We will be requesting to double the SOAR class size, and SOAR's successful outcome comes after release. Many of you are familiar how we touch former offenders with felonies and misdemeanors and make sure we get them working with the city of Winston-Salem and funding groups and community organizations that are doing the work. So the request would be $190,000 for doubling the class size of SOAR. There is a request here to break down the million for $160,000 to double the summer youth employment program. As you know, over the last 3 homicides, I believe some of them were 14 and 15 and maybe even younger. So what I see are young people who need to find new ways to win. It's one way to tell somebody don't commit crimes, but if all you see is abject poverty and you haven't been given opportunities for gainful employment, which is what SOAR is all about, we're hustling backwards. There is a proposal to raise the city government minimum wage for our least paid frontline employees to $14 an hour, which that would give us a price tag of $330,000. In the proposal, $320,000 would go towards emergency rent eviction assistance, and I know there are some people who are signed up to speak to that. That totals the $1 million. So members of the council and committee, typically our protocol is that we speak first, but there are so many people who have waited patiently to be able to speak. So without objection, I'd ask that we bring in our speakers. Let's hear from them 2 to 3 minutes, and then we can make our decision on this particular proposal. Is there anyone opposed to that? Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes, Chair Taylor, would you consider 1 minute per individual so you could get everybody as more people, possibly?
I think we can. I think it's my understanding it's about 5 people.
Okay.
So if we keep it at 5 and give them 2 or 3 minutes, I think we can get in and out fairly quickly and hear them all. So the first speaker, if you give your name and address for the record, and you have 2 to 3 minutes to be heard. Thank you, ma'am.
I want to thank you for this opportunity to come speak with you. And my name is Jo Frazier. I do not want to publicly give my address, and I've been a resident of Winston-Salem my entire life. And I'm glad I came to this meeting because I have learned, and I can't breathe with this, so forgive me. I've learned a lot tonight. I knew that based on situations where I've had to call the police department I knew that they were professional in their handling of the situation. But after hearing the two captains talk about the training that they put the members through, the police officers, that cost a lot of money. And obviously, it has been well spent. And I would be really concerned that we are considering reallocating $1 million from that department because, as Chief Thompson mentioned, you know, other departments want to recruit our officers. So we're going to train them, and they're going to be the best of the best. What was it, #1 in the state, in North Carolina? And I think she said the Triumph. I couldn't understand. And then number 23 internationally. So that makes our force, I mean, people are going to want them. And so I took the $1 million and divided it by the 15 positions. That's $66,666 a year. And personally, they need to be paid double if that's even their salary. But from what I've understood from prior meetings, not all of them make that. I've heard that it's been less than that. So why, in a situation, in an environment where, #1, they have to get dressed every day, and how would we want to go to our jobs and every day hear how bad we're doing? The public and the media just really trashes them. But they get up every day and then they put their weapons on. And I'm sure that they hope that they never have to pull it. But if they do, they need to be trained. And it sounds like our folks are being trained. So I would really, I'm not saying these other initiatives are not important, but it seems that there would be a very thorough audit of the other programs where we are providing services for those that are disadvantaged to make sure those funds are being utilized correctly and efficiently in providing the services, and leave that $1 million for our police force. If there's 40 positions available, vacant, did I hear that correctly?
That's correct.
And we're going to take 15. I just think that's a bad allocation of funds. I feel, you know, my tax dollars.
Ms. Frazier, if you can summarize, your time is up, please.
Okay. I just want you to really look at all of the departments, divisions that are providing resources to make sure that we're spending the money correctly. And it sounds like it needs to be in the police department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, please. If you can come and give your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Austin Hicks. I live 5490 Loop Road. I am a community organizer. I've actually been working with people like Olivia Moore and Frankie Gist, as you mentioned earlier, to put together these protests for justice for George Floyd, pass policy.
Welcome.
So I would like to speak to your resolution about doubling resources for the youth summer employment opportunities. Y'all were talking about private crime earlier, and somebody mentioned managing symptoms of crime. Why don't you just prevent them so you don't have any symptoms to deal with? Now, if you get kids doing stuff in the summer, they won't be out on the streets. They won't be messing around with friends. They won't potentially be doing criminal activities or anything. They'll be making money for their families. They'll be getting money for college, which is something that's so vitally important in today's economy. I'm going to college in about, a couple months? And if I had such an opportunity to help pay for my education, I would take it. And there needs to be more resources for people who aren't as privileged as I am, people who are not as lucky as I am, to get those opportunities to move up in the world. Because Winston-Salem has one of the lowest rates of upward mobility of any city in the nation. The New York Times published that a couple years ago. But these are the steps that you need to take to do that. And $160,000, I think you said it was, that's a lot of money, and that's exactly what people need. And now, people in the summertime, if they don't have that kind of opportunity, they're not being productive, they're not learning, they're not getting on-the-job training, they're not getting that kind of experience you need to move into the working world. And that kind of experience you're getting on the job really does take a hard hit at crime and at like confrontations. I mean, oh God, sorry. Yes. Yes, and it also really does hit on the school to prison pipeline.
Right.
I mean, it's just an extension of that where they would often not have like daycare services, they wouldn't normally have like after school kind of activities. They have that opportunity to get a job, to do whatever things, any sort of activity in the summer. And I think it's a great way to tackle that whole thing.
Thank you for coming to make your voice heard, Mr. Hicks. You got 15 seconds. Anything else you want to add?
I really support what you're doing with the 8 can't wait thing. Listening to all of that, I would just like to say that thank you so much for bringing that resolution to the table.
Thank you for being here to speak, sir. Appreciate your voice. Yes, ma'am. If you come to the mic and speak and give your name and address for the record, and if you just speak into the mic as much as you can because it's difficult for folks to hear.
Okay. Marilyn Handy. I live at 145 Lowry Court, apartment H, in the zip code 27101. I came down because we're faced with a situation in that community where the new landlords that took over sent out a letter on May 1st saying that everybody has to move. He's not accepting rent. We have to move. And so he gave us to the end of May to move. And there are 5 families on the side that I live on that have no money to relocate. We all have been looking, and that's just on my side. I know 2 neighbors down on the end, and there's another part of the complex. And everybody's looking, and it's really stressful because he's coming out every week to see if we found a place. Okay, everybody's looking. We're doing our best to relocate. We don't have any incentives, any vouchers, anything that's gonna help us get out. So the only thing we have is May's rent that would accommodate us for a new location. And so we're looking at the deposit, we're looking at rent, and we're looking at getting a moving truck and all that we need to be relocated. But it's very stressful for the residents to have someone knock on the door every week to say, have you moved? And so we're really trying. I mean, I have a list on my phone. I moved in to help my daughter who has a medical condition and cannot work. And so I came there to pay the rent for her until she got situated, and then I could go back, and then they could move on. And my granddaughter's there. We have 2 small kids there, ages 3 and 5. And so we're dealing with an ADHD kid, this 3-year-old is getting help. The mom works at Walmart, and so they need my income to kind of help move. It's difficult for me because my credit is not in the best condition for me to just go find a place. It's not basically money for me, but I got to be there to help my kids. I can't just walk off and leave them and they don't have the funds to support themselves and be able to relocate. And so we're just wondering, what do we do now? Where do we go? I mean, we don't have anywhere to go. Everybody, and if you want to get in a neighborhood that you don't have to dodge bullets and all this stuff, you want to go somewhere where you can feel safe, and that costs money. And so that's money that a lot of the people in the neighborhood don't have.
Ms. Handy, your time is up, but I just want to say thanks for coming to speak. Part of this proposal allocates $320,000 for rental or eviction assistance, and if you can leave your information with the staff, we'll make sure that you and your neighbors will get your information. We'll try to do what we can to support. There is no guarantee, but if we're able to pass this, we can be a little bit more supportive than we've been in the past. But thanks for coming out, allowing your voice to be heard. Councilmember Adams.
Yes, Chairman Taylor. Does the city, can she speak a minute to that? I thought the governor has a moratorium on evictions and things like that to July, I think.
I want to recognize the city attorney, Attorney Carmen. If you can just speak to the governor's moratorium on evictions.
Good afternoon, Chairman, committee members, council members.
Good afternoon.
That moratorium, I believe, has been extended. I'm just not certain of the date, but I'll be happy to get with the speaker.
Okay.
Get her that information.
Thank you, ma'am. She's leaving her information, and we will follow up, Ms. Handy. If you can bring in the next speaker, please. Ken, if you can give your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Chris McKen. I'm running for mayor of Winston-Salem. I live at 205 Cool Springs Road, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I come here tonight and really didn't have time to prepare this because it was on short order. Mr. Taylor, is it true that you asked for people to come to start a protest tonight? I have an email saying that. Is that true?
There are people who are protesting, and this is a good way to do it with protesting policy.
And you asked for that?
You have the floor, sir.
Okay. Well, my next question is, can we go back to 2012? Wasn't you arrested in Walnut Cove for violating the law?
You have the floor, sir.
And in that, the first thing that you did is you said it was racial profiling.
Because she wasn't in the car when she pulled me over, but you have the floor, sir.
But
if you want to get to the point, we can talk offline.
The point is you later pleaded guilty. So you were stopped with reason. That's what our police officers go through every day. When they stop people for a reason, they have a reason to stop them. And they have a certain reason to expect a little bit of respect, but our people that are stopped also have a right to expect to be respected and treated fairly and equitably. Not to be treated special, but to be treated fairly. They need to learn how to follow commands. Just simple things would do that.
Man, it's got you.
Tonight I come here and I'm at a meeting where we're practicing social distancing. But just a few days ago, out on the streets of our great city, there was protests going on and there was nothing to worry about social distancing. There were people without masks, just like I am tonight. If you want to be respected, it commands that you follow and do the right things, that you apply the law equally to everyone. And it applies equally in all aspects of what's going on in our city. And also, you have a concealed carry permit as well as I. Do you have that permit and do you carry a weapon because you think our police are always there and it's a safe place to be, or are you like me, you're a little bit in fear of where we live? But yet you are asking to dismantle or to take away positions of our police force, and that's not the way to do it. We're already short. And as you heard our chief say, people are waiting at the door to get the people that we train. So just as quick as we train them, we have turnover. We need to keep that number of people here to protect our citizens and to utilize our tax dollars the way they are. You want to give money for rent or for people that are being evicted, and I certainly understand that. But what about the business owners we didn't allow to go to work for many, many weeks?
If you can summarize, please, Mr. McCann. Your time is up.
My time is up?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Mr. Bowen, if you can give your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Scott Andrew Bowen. My address is 659 Brent Street, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hope everyone is doing well tonight. I am here tonight. I am a pastor of a local church. I run a food pantry at my local church. I am also honored to serve on the Urban Food Policy Council for the City Council. I serve as the vice chair. I'm not here as a representative of that council tonight, but I'm here as a representative of myself and just wanted to let you know. I believe that food insecurity is a real problem in this city. Poverty is a real problem in this city. So I'll be brief. I would love for this council to pass this resolution. One thing I didn't agree with anything the guy who just walked out the door said, but the one thing I do agree with is this. If you take it from the police department, you take it from the police department. If you take it from somewhere else, you take it from somewhere else. I would love to see money go to people in poverty to fight food insecurity. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next speaker, please. If you would give your name and address for the record.
My name is this audible or okay? My name is Donovan Beatty. The main thing that I wanted to speak on is I do appreciate that the work the Winston-Salem Police Department does, especially the fact that they do twice as much training as the average place. But what I would say is just because you do a better job does not mean you do a good job. It's hard to really trust what is going on as the average citizen, an average person, an average black person, only because you have, this is very hot, you have places that have already had a lot of these rules that this eight can't wait, like how Minneapolis had, you weren't supposed to do chokeholds, that was instated in like 2003. But that is exactly how George Floyd died, and they would have never seen any type of repercussions for that until people decided they were going to march in the streets for a couple weeks. And it's that public pressure that really is the only reason why he's getting any type of justice. And when the police are policing the police, then how can we really be sure people are being held accountable for the actions? As much as we can say they're going to be reprimanded or whatever, if all it is if they witness something that they were supposed to intervene and then they just get a stern talking to and it costs somebody's life, did that really do anything? And then you have situations where people will get fired and then they'll just go to another county. So just what is really the thing that is holding these officers accountable and holding these people in power accountable? Because if all you're doing is just you did this and that's it, but it cost somebody's life, how can the average person feel safe? And that's really what is keeping the average person from truly believing in this stuff. Even as much reform as we want to do, how can we really be assured that anyone is going to be held accountable when the people who do the wrong are in policing themselves? And I know y'all were speaking a little bit about defunding the police. I think that most certainly is a good thing. I know you were talking about allocating it to places so people don't feel like they have to commit crimes. We all know that crimes are usually in relation to poverty and desperation. So just, I don't know how 15 vacant police slots is worth $1 million, but that is a lot of money. So just, I don't know how much Winston-Salem spends on that stuff, but that I'm sure it's an absurd amount that can be used a lot of places.
Billy, your time is up. Do you want to summarize?
Yeah, just what accountability is really it. Like, how can we really be sure that people are going to be held accountable? Like, really be sure that people are going to be held accountable.
Thank you for coming to speak to us, sir. It's my understanding okay. You come and give your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Clifford Owens. I would rather not disclose my address, but I have lived on all sides of Winston-Salem, and obviously there's many issues that plague this city, and police reform being one of them, as far as, housing, zoning, economic, environmental, I could go on and on, we could talk hours. But I just want to ask two questions. So I'm looking at this police budget right now, which is public information, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at these numbers, and according to what I'm seeing, only 1% of the budget is allocated toward community resources, and that's less than 1%, really. And that's scary, because I don't like less than 1% for the community. The police serves the community. Y'all serve the community. And when people say defund the police, they're not talking about defunding. My dad was a police officer. I have family members who are military and police officers. We're not talking about, I want them to have all the tools they need, but I also want them to be out in the community. I want them to walk the beat. I want to know the police officers in my neighborhood. I want to, have that communication with them, and that comes with putting more money into community outreach and community resources. So I'm just wondering why there's only less than 1% in the police budget for community resources, if anybody can answer that. Oh, well, I'm very new to this, you know. I'm a young 24-year-old black man, so this is my first time me being here. I didn't even know this meeting was happening, so I guess y'all can't answer questions or whatever, but.
I want to give you your full time, but there is a grantee agency request process where the city sort of works with agencies in the form of about $1.2 million to do community outreach as well. And a certain amount of money, I think it's about $550,000 that are for grants. So that money is broken out because of previous years, but I'm happy to get you more of a detailed update, but
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, okay, and I also would like to see what police reform actions y'all have in place, and if I can get a copy or a link to that so I could share that with the public, because it is public information. And yeah, I mean, if I could get that, you know, that'd be awesome.
Yes, sir. So this is the last item for tonight. If you just want to sit tight, I'll meet with you afterwards and get you all the information you need.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, thank y'all for letting me speak.
Appreciate you being here. Next speaker. Simmons, if you can give your name and address for the record, please.
It don't matter which mic.
It does.
Pamatina Simmons. I actually live in the South Ward, and the question that I have is, we hear a lot about police. I've had several shootings in my neighborhood. I think one of the shootings, they actually caught the people. And I just had another one this weekend, and I was actually out on foot today talking to a lot of residents, finding out different things and seeing what they have done. But my question is, I see y'all saying to allocate money and defund and seeing money here and seeing money there. So you're not talking about really, like, as far as the police force, how many, do we have enough on staff as of now if you don't put some money back towards that? Is it like we gonna be short, or is it like we just gonna work with what we got?
To speak quickly, there are 40 vacant police
Yeah.
positions. We don't anticipate being able to fill all those throughout the course of the fiscal year.
Okay. So we just gonna, well, and another thing is, we gonna have any, like throughout my neighborhood, can I just see one every now and then riding through? Just, I mean, I know I had some other residents to speak on that today too to me. That was one of their concerns. Can we just have one ride through our neighborhood, just every now and then? I know most times if I see them, they normally wave or whatever when they come through. Can we just have one to just ride through? Because we kind of like, they got the pinpoint of who it may be in the neighborhood doing different little things. So they actually have drawn up a petition against one person now to see if they can get that person out the neighborhood. So they are working, and I've been out there like on foot talking to a lot of residents, getting different stuff, and I will be bringing some other stuff back to the city council. But that is one of my main concerns. And like I said, I was born and raised in this city, and I know not all police is bad, not all is good, but it's like a lot of the kids, they're a little afraid to even speak or talk to the police in a lot of situations, even in my neighborhood. It's like when they see them coming, they think they're the baddest person in the world. In some kind of way, it should be some kind of way where we can try to turn that around. And I'm willing in my community to try to see what I can do. Because a lot of kids I talk to, I tell them pull their pants up, I tell them do different things, and they listen a lot to me. But I'm trying to see what else can I do with the police to try to see if we can turn it around. If not in my neighborhood, I don't know about nobody, but if we can try to get that respect back between them. So if they see him, they ain't, like one of my son is even afraid of him. And I don't want him to be like that. He's 13. To see if we can try to turn them around to see if they can get a little positive, you know, when they see him, they don't have to be afraid of them or think they're the baddest person in the world. Just something to see what else I can do. Thank you.
So thank you. You have 21 seconds. I will say, Ms. Simmons, I've come out to meet with you and your neighbors in the past, and there was a police officer present. The good thing about it is the District 2 police officers in close proximity, so I think we can get a little bit more police presence. I'll speak with Captain Melly, and I know how to find you, so I'll follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Thank you to the public for coming in to comment. Members of the committee, there is a proposal on the table. Again, there are 40 vacant police officer positions. We don't anticipate being able to fill them all. This proposal would just reallocate funding for 15 to do the very thing that we've discussed, reducing recidivism and working to reduce crime in the community. I'll start with Mr. McIntosh. I'll roll to Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and then we'll get everybody in. Councilman McIntosh.
As you and I discussed earlier today and before the meeting, My only hesitation on this project is I would like to get confirmation from police chief that this is not going to substantially damage our ability to protect the citizens of Winston-Salem. And my sense is that the 40 positions probably are not going to get filled. We are, again, in a situation where people don't want to sign up for law enforcement because of national, conditions. My sense is that this will not eat into our efficiency, or we're doing an adequate job now. Everybody wants more police presence in there. Just as a speaker, I'd like to have somebody drive through. I'd like to have more police downtown. Everybody wants more police presence. So we'll probably have to elongate that and not get what we want. But I'm just looking for something from Chief that says we can survive, we can do a good job, we can provide an adequate level of coverage without those 15 jobs.
Chief, I guess, would you make your way up? I guess the question on the floor is whether or not you believe we can provide the level of services with the absence of 15 out of those 40 positions. I know that puts you in an uncompromising position, but I will say, Councilwoman McIntosh, I have spoken to the representative for the police, I wouldn't say police union, but the police association, and they are in support of this particular proposal as well. Chief.
Thank you. And so I think I kind of mentioned this earlier. As has been mentioned, we have not had the ability to fill positions. We do have vacancies. Of course, we're always working towards getting those vacancies filled. We're talking about the next fiscal year. I am open to the compromise of the recommendation. However, I do think, as I've stated before, that, as you've mentioned as well, that officers are being asked to do a lot. And so we want to be able to continue to meet the request and the expectations and provide the greatest service delivery that we can. So as long as we can do the balance of both, and that this is not something we're talking about doing beyond this next fiscal year, I can be in support of it.
This will be a one-time proposal.
And are we still facing challenges in getting full recruiting classes?
We are
Correct.
still facing challenges. We currently have a recruit class of 30 recruits right now. We're expecting to graduate them sometime in August, and we're looking to start another class in October.
Right, so even with 30 coming in, we'll have attrition, so we'll still be kind of where we are now. So I guess my point is that even if we left those 15 positions in we'd like to have them, we probably won't fill them.
That's about accurate.
Okay.
We continue, again,
Right.
Our goal is to always try, as it has been. But again, as long as we're not talking about totally removing those positions,
Right.
Again, I can work with supporting the 15 for this next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you, that helps.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Thank you, Chief. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. I just want to give everybody a reality check. Everybody occasionally seems to forget where we are right now in this country economically. That's why you get the numerous emails from me all the time about the National League of Cities and elected officials across the country stepping up to get the administration to understand that if we don't get that $533 billion to help us, I'm not promising anybody that cuts aren't coming. There are other cities, thousands right now, have cut police, fire, sanitation, and everything else. And we're sitting here acting like, well, maybe this is a one-year thing. This may be a permanent thing, like I've tried to communicate to everybody, for the next 5+ years. This is not like the recession in 08 and 09. This means that we have to be more innovative. We have to be smarter. But in the onset of that, we have got to be able that we also include our citizens as to that they get to be a part of the solutions of how we keep moving forward. Again, people are smart. They read data. It's public information. And to a person that is living in a gunshot neighborhood, there is poverty, there are no jobs, and jobs gone, and we're laying off across the country. If you haven't seen the headlines of the news, government workers are the hardest hit right now because cities are having to cut. States, counties are having to cut. When we were talking about those 40 vacant spots, people from hearing you, and I'm sitting here, I'm a communications man, people would have the impression that we're going to lay off people. Right. People have the impression that we got a line of people out the door waiting to become a policeman. It's not true. And people have the perception that we're not going to pay our police more and therefore they're going to leave and it's our fault. Well, I'm not taking that one because none of that is true. And I think Mr. Garrity and staff, Ms. Logan Ford, Chief Thompson, Mr. Taylor, all of us need to get on the same page and communicate the same message. Like I tell people that people get it, and there's no other of us putting a little sprinkled pixie dust on it and making it sound like something else. We need to understand we have to do more with less. And if police, and I don't have nothing but love for all employees, but you cannot make people stay where they don't want to be. You cannot make people apply for a job that they don't want to do. And if we think that the money is going to appear in property taxes, general fund, rude awakening, people, this thing, I just tell you like my mom and daddy used to tell me, don't promise nothing you can't keep. I'm done.
Councilman Larson.
There's always a staffing need in the police department. It was defined years ago. Ever since I've been on council, we've never met that staffing need. I think when I came on council, there were 60 vacant positions, and I think right now that's about how many we got. We take out the class and whatever, get down to 40 or more, or what have you. It's a condition that we're living with. It happened before, this idea of reallocating. We're not talking about eliminating slots right now. We're not talking about eliminating positions within the police department. What we're really talking about is whether we're going to reallocate salary resources on a temporary basis to see if we can address some systemic needs within our broader community right now. And the question sort of arises, you can have the money sitting in vacant officer police slots that are not going to be filled this year, or that money can be reallocated to some pressing social needs that we have within this community. What I'm hearing from Chief Thompson is she's concerned about not being able to meet her mission, that she's got people doing overtime, she's got people that are stressed out because of the conditions of pandemic and everything else of the police department. And I understand that, I got that. But the problem is I can't get more recruits for you right now, as much as I'd like to do that. I cannot fill those classes. What I think we can do, however, is begin to address some of the broader issues that this city faces that we may want to begin to address that are beginning to percolate up in these discussions that I've heard over the last several weeks. And if we take some of this money, and it's a one-time deal, and if things get so bad, as Councilmember Adams was saying, that we have to reevaluate in November, then we will reevaluate and they may get cut back out again. I can't promise anything will happen. But I can say that as we go into these budget hearings, if we look at where resources are and what city needs are right now, particularly in viewing the last couple of weeks, it seems to me we've got to begin to address some needs. And this program of giving summer youth and dealing with some housing issues, minimum wages to allow people to have decent jobs and decent opportunities in their homes, seems to be begin to address some, at least give some priority that this council is paying attention to some of these things. And so with that in mind, I think it's worth a try. Now, I know that, the cities, I don't know how the city would spend the money otherwise. I guess it would go into general revenue of some sort. If these salaries remain empty, these seats remain, these positions remain unfilled, yet they're budgeted for and the money's set aside for them, what that means ultimately. But we've done this before. As I came on council, I recall we were trying to give police raises one year. And I believe one year we put sort of an equivalent program of taking some money from vacant slots and allocating it to the police for that year to allow that to occur. And we couldn't backfill the seats, but we did take care of the police force at that time a little bit. So I think there's a precedent for doing this, and I think we could probably look at it fairly seriously as to what maybe the best needs of the city are at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Councilwoman Scipio.
I certainly agree with most comments that have been made this evening on this. If the chief is comfortable with not having those 15 slots in her budget, then I'm certainly in favor of us utilizing those funds in a very proactive way. My biggest concern is that we must build people, and the proposed use of those funds is not necessarily about preventing any kind of poverty. The people that we're talking about targeting for the SOAR program, perhaps the summer youth program, are people who may benefit in transitioning their attitude. For me, what's missing are elementary and middle school kids who really is where we can effect some type of change in behavior. To me, it's better to build strong children, strong youth, so we don't have to repair broken adults. So if we put some monies there in those projects or those organizations that's already building strong youth, like the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCAs, the Guide Project, I like for us to think a little broader about who we're funding if we're going to use these dollars. If the summer youth program was not in the proposal, I would say let's wait until mid-year in the budget in January to see what does it look like in our overall budget. I do have the same concerns that Mayor Pro Tem raised, that I know we're looking at, we think, a very austere budget. I'm not so certain if it's really the worst case scenario. I'm a bit concerned about what the future is going to bring between now and December especially. And to me, I would rather hold off on allocating these funds until we have a clearer path on what we're going to be looking at as a city, where we might be needing to use some funds for something that comes up that we don't know about. So for me, if we go forward, I want to have some elementary and middle school kids impacted, because that's where we're looking at prevention instead of cure. And we'll start building our young people that way.
Thank you, Councilwoman Scipio. Councilman Bessie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still working through the issues involved here and don't have ready comments. I know that it's complicated by the fact that we need to do more than we have the funding to do. And the question becomes, well, how do we get some of the funding that we need for some of what we need to do, and where do we get it from? And on top of that, it's sort of complicated by misunderstanding and sloganeering. I don't think there's anybody on this council who wants to defund the police, and that's a slogan that's being thrown around in some circles that absolutely doesn't find a home here. And I know that the chair's intent is to find a place to put some extra resources in some of the community efforts that help the community economic and social environment to reduce the likelihood of crime. And that's something I think we all support. The discrete question in this case is it safe in terms of making sure that our police department is as fully staffed as we can make it? Is it safe to put what the chair has proposed as a temporary freeze on 15 of those 40 vacant positions in the expectation that, unfortunately, we would not have been able to fill those anyway during this calendar year because of our eternal problems in filling out our authorized force? And that's the specific question that I know that the committee is wrestling with and that the council will ultimately wrestle with. There is no proposal on the table, as I've heard it, to eliminate those 15 positions from the authorized departmental force. There is a proposal to anticipate in the budget and therefore freeze funding for 15 of those positions in the frank anticipation we would not have been able to keep those spots filled over the next year. And that's a very different thing from the sloganeering about defunding policing. And I know that part of what some of us have to wrestle with is making sure that it's not misunderstood as that. So there are two separate questions there. Can we safely do it? Can we do it without the public misunderstanding what we're doing? And I think also Councilmember Scipio has added a third question to that, is this the best possible use of redirecting those funds? And they're all tough ones.
Councilman Bessie, I think several things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of times in society, we think we have to choose one or the other. But I think we can adequately support and fund the police department and then adequately promote social programs and ways to reduce recidivism and poverty. And I think this is a unique way that we found to be able to do just this. And this isn't James Taylor or the city council against the police department. I support the police department. This isn't about defunding the police department. This is simply about reallocating positions that have not been filled and historically have not been filled until we're able to fill them. This is a one-time deal, and I think this is the right thing to do. There are going to be people in our community that are going to roll up and they're going to put a divisive wedge in everything that's been done. Because guess what? When you watch national politics, it trickles down to the local level. And there are people on the right side and there are people on the left side who will do whatever they can to start some mess. Well, the reason why mess hasn't been started in the city of Winston-Salem is because we're smarter than that. We're the only major city in North Carolina without a curfew. We're the only major city in North Carolina not to have the type of violence that we've seen in other cities. Why? Because the key word for today is leadership. And you've heard our chief stand up. It wasn't easy to say that, but we feel that several things can be true at the same time and we can do both. So again, this isn't us going against the police department. This is simply us standing with the police department. And as you heard, the police association is supportive. You've heard the police chief is supportive. City staff is supportive, and this council seems to be supportive. So now we depend on our marketing and communications department. We depend on the Chronicle. We depend on the Journal. We depend on Tri-City Beat to tell the story the right way. And I would never not have the courage to make a decision because somebody's going to misinterpret what we say or what we do. We know we're doing the right thing from the heart. I'm born and reared in this city. Amen. I'm the only African-American man on this city council. And if we don't speak up for what's right, then who will? So if they want to drive a divisive wedge into what we're trying to do, then let them. But at the end of the day, I'm going to sleep well like a newborn baby because I know that the good Lord put me on this earth for a purpose. And today, that purpose is to work for these people who you heard at this podium. Now, we ain't going to agree with everybody who has something to say. I vehemently disagree with Mr. McCann, but he executed his right and exercise his right to speak with his voice, and he can do it again, and I'll listen to him 10 times out of 10. And I should not have spoke back when he spoke because that is democracy. This is the right thing to do. Members of the committee, If everyone's been heard, Councilmember Bessie, do you have an additional comment?
Yes, just brief. I don't want to be mistaken as having said that we can't do it. I was just laying out some of the questions that we're going to have to address if we do it. That I'm not making a recommendation to the committee that you not act today, because if you want this to be considered by the council in conjunction with this budget, you have to send something forward for consideration.
Yes, sir. And nor did I insinuate that you meant that, so thank you for clearing that up. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard before we call the question? Is there a motion on the floor to approve this item? It's been moved by Councilmember Larson and seconded by Councilmember McIntosh. All in favor, please vote yes. Opposers are able to vote no. That passes this committee unanimously, and it will be considered at the June 15th City Council meeting. With that being said, is there any other further business that should be considered for the good of the order? Considering no further business, we consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.